So today we're going to talk about miracles. And miracles are such an important part of the biblical foundation of who we are because of who Jesus was. Because of the miracles, the message of Jesus spread like wildfire throughout the region. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines a biblical miracle this way: an extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. Easton's Biblical Dictionary expounds on that definition and says that a miracle has a purpose: to bring forth new revelation from God and validate that message and its messenger. So as we talk about miracles today in the New Testament, I want to focus on the biblical understanding of miracles and caution us to be really careful, because in our modern language, we often refer to a lot of things as miracles. But today, let's focus on Jesus' miracles. I say that because biblical scholars remind us, for example, that while the marvel of birth is awe-inspiring, and for anyone that's ever given birth, we like to think that it certainly was a miracle, women have been giving birth for centuries, in fact, all the way back to Adam and Eve. So biblical miracles are very, very different from natural things that happen day after day. I also want to suggest that a lot of times biblical miracles are very different from providential and exceptionally incredible medical healing. When there's disease or injury as the result of anything terrible, exceptional medical and surgical practices, often because of the spiritual gifts of healing that God has given to human beings, so often we call those miracles, which again I feel are could be very easily defined as God's providence, but they're not the divine kind of biblical miracles that we're going to talk about today. First, when we call every single thing that's wonderful a miracle, it kind of diminishes the power of who Jesus really is. And when we use miraculous healing to define and describe why one person has healed and another hasn't, it kind of makes us wonder about why God would choose to heal you, but not choose to heal you if, in fact, it's all a miracle anyway. So I just want us to be careful about that. I want to say that God's providence is involved in all of this because He is the creator of everything. So, of course, God works for good in all things. But we live in a fallen world, and ultimately bad things do happen to even good people. And so we just trust in the Romans 8:28 text that says, regardless of how things happen, God is working for good that sometimes we just don't see. Now let's talk about Mark. And in the Gospel of Mark, there are 18 miracles that Jesus performed. But only 2 of those are unique to the Gospel of Mark. We'll talk about those 2 actually next week. But when we talk about miracles, I want you to recognize as you read all of the Gospels, and even the miracles from the Old Testament, that the English word miracle is often translated in the same words of both Hebrew and in Greek. So these apply to Old and New Testament, that are words interchangeably used like power, mighty works, and signs and wonders. So when you read those words throughout the Bible, those are miraculous things that are happening because of God. Before I go on, I also want to just talk about the pink elephant in the room that always comes up whenever there's a conversation about miracles. Are miracle stories meant to be factual reports? And if they are intended to be factual, are they all true? Did these things actually happen the way they're written about? Many Christians, of course, say yes. Yes, their factuality matters because miracles prove that Jesus is divine, because only the Son of God can do things that Jesus did, that we read about with our eyes wide open and our hearts full of awe. But the second component of the question is a little bit different. Are the facts of these stories important to their meaning? And what are their meanings all about, really? Last week, for example, we talked about the miracle of the multiplication of the fishes and the loaves, which, by the way, is one of the two miracles that appears in all 4 of the Gospels. We talked about one of the main purposes of that text was that Jesus empowered the disciples. He empowered his followers who thought they had nothing to offer, who thought that they could never be helpful in the kingdom without Jesus. They were the ones that empowered to go out and do the work and collect the fish and separate the group into smaller, manageable groups. Their response was, "I don't have what it takes, Jesus. I can't help you here." And we learned so rapidly that that is just not the truth. That was the meaning and the power of that miracle for us. Miracles are exceptionally important when we understand who Jesus was, when we look at our biblical roots. But there's also a way to understand miracles that some theologians call parabolic narratives. Now, Jesus' parables, for example, which we talked about early in this sermon series, are not factual stories, they're metaphors. They're interesting, appealing stories that keep your attention, but everyone agrees they are important stories. They are based in truth. They are based in biblical necessary information, and they communicate truth to us even though they're not true stories. So think of it this way. Jesus told parables to help people understand God. Perhaps his followers may have told parables to help people understand Jesus. Now, I can't tell you the definitive answer to this because we all experience the way we read the Bible in very, very personal ways. So I share this with you as spiritual food for thought so that you can contemplate the focus of where these miracles make a difference in your life. Today, though, I'm not focusing on the facts. I'm not going to try to prove to you that these miracles happened. What I'm going to focus on and what they mean for us as disciples of Jesus Christ. So let's start in Mark chapter 5. This is a really interesting story of a woman who is a woman with a hemorrhage, whose story is within a story of Jairus' daughter who is dying. By telling these two stories in an intertwined way, Mark does what only Mark can do, and he creates this dramatic situation where these are both very critical situations that Jesus has been asking to deal with. It begins when Jesus is invited by the father of a young girl from a wealthy family. She's possessed by an unclean spirit, but on the way to going to visit her in her home, he's interrupted, Jesus is, by a woman who has been living on the streets alone for 12 years because she is unclean. She has been bleeding not monthly, but every day for 12 years. So as you listen to Max McLean read from the NIV version of this chapter, ask yourself, what is Jesus trying to tell us? Miracles and meanings. And oh, there is so much in this miracle that helps us understand the meaning in the text. First of all, Jesus treated Jairus and his family, a wealthy, well-to-do family of influential means, and the woman who was poor and impoverished, exactly the same way. That woman that was socially outcast had just as much of Jesus's attention as the man from that influential family. Everyone is equal in the sight of the Lord. Both stories also involve something that's very important in the Hebrew focus, and certainly throughout Mark's gospel, and that is ritual uncleanness. You see, the woman was unclean because of her hemorrhaging, but the child became unclean the moment she died. That meant anyone who touched either one of them would be rendered unclean simply by touching them. And yet Jesus not only touched them both, he heals one and raises the other from the dead. In both stories, the Greek word used for heal or healing or healed also means to deliver from danger. And here's what's very interesting about those words. The Greek translation from the Old Testament and the New Testaments, in those we learn that the same word is often referred to salvation of the Israelites in the Old Testament and to Christian salvation in the New Testament. So what we see here is the story of Jairus' daughter and the woman who is hemorrhaging are not just healing miracles, they are the miracle of salvation story of who Jesus is and why he came. It is salvation that is given to both of them because of what? Their considerable faith in Jesus Christ. Jairus is convinced that Jesus' touch will make his daughter well, will raise her from the dead. And the woman is convinced just by touching his cloak that she too can be healed. And Jesus commends the woman for her faith, saying, "Daughter, daughter, your faith has made you well," or has saved you, as some translations say. And when Jairus gets the word that his daughter is dead, Jesus says, "Don't be afraid, just believe. Believe." The purpose of these miracles is to tell us that faith matters. Faith matters. Now, I also want to touch briefly on the miracle at sea. There are several of these nature miracles on the sea, and I want you to listen in Mark's gospel. It's a little different from Matthew's gospel, but listen to where the purpose is that we have this miracle to study. What I love about this story is that the disciples thought Jesus was a ghost. And of course we would too. They were terrified. They were in the middle of a storm. They were frightened. And they had left Jesus back on the shore. But alone in the boat, the disciples were traumatized in the storm. But what did Jesus say to them? He said, "Take heart. It is I, do not be afraid. Now this meaning is amplified for us in an episode from Matthew that tells the story about how when Peter saw Jesus walking on the water, he walked out towards Jesus on the lake. And there were Peter and Matthew walking on the lake together on the water. But do you remember what happened to Peter? As soon as Peter took his eyes off Jesus, what happened? He sunk like a rock. He took his eyes off Jesus and completely fell apart. And after rescuing Peter that day, Jesus scolded Peter and said, oh, you of little faith. So the connection in this miracle is so strong for us. Fear and lack of faith will always cause us to sink. Now, if we read the story literally, of course, Jesus and Peter are walking on the water, but I'm not sure that's the most important part of the message. I think the most important part of the message is about what? Faith. It's about faith. We must have enough faith to keep Jesus in the boat with us at all times. Because if we don't, we are never going to make it alone. The second miracle that is in all four Gospels is the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida. And by itself, it's just a simple, very short healing miracle. But I mentioned this one real quickly because Mark's gospel contains two miracles about healing of blind men. The first one, of course, is in Bartimaeus, or this one rather, in Bethsaida. And the second one is the healing of a man named Bartimaeus in Mark 10. What's important to understand about these two miracles is that they bookend a very, very critical part of the Gospel of Mark, which we won't talk about for another 2 weeks, but it's important you understand that this segment that we're getting ready to move into is important because this healing of the blind is placed there with purpose, because it is the beginning of Jesus predicting his own death. It will soon be time, you see, for Jesus to begin his journey to the cross in Jerusalem and his ultimate death. And Jesus is trying to say to his disciples, open your eyes and see. I'm trying to talk to you about this. Open your hearts and understand what is about to come. Now, if you'll remember from past sermons, I've regularly mentioned how often Jesus foreshadowed his own death and predicted it for his disciples so that they would understand that his death was imminent. But they remained confused all the time, even until the very last night of Jesus' crucifixion. All the way up to the end, they were still asking questions and shaking their heads. But this blindness of the miracles that bookend the death predictions, the one at Bethsaida and the one of Bartimaeus, function as a metaphor for their lack of understanding what was to come. This certainly is made clear to us in Mark 8 when Jesus himself says, "Do you still not perceive or understand? Do you have eyes and fail to see?" So these two miracles are very important for us. So today, we touch just lightly on miracles. I've done 8-week Bible studies on Jesus' miracles. So we've just gotten a little bit of taste today for their beautiful role especially in the New Testament and who Jesus is. This is a book, the Bible, that has a message for all time. It's the highest selling book in the history of books ever written throughout the entire world. And it's because it has a message that is important for all people, and that is the gift of forgiveness and eternal life, the message of salvation that has been given to every single one of us. So the bottom line of the miracles reminds us that faith matters. Faith is important. And when you trust in God enough to have complete faith in His love for you, you better be prepared to be amazed by God.